Thanks very much. Delighted to be here. I can't claim to be expert in every single one of the issues that you want to discuss, but I certainly keep abreast of developments in the area. The reason I'm here is that I am committed to environmentalism. I am committed to keeping our environment safe and our environment healthy, and I'm committed to the reality of climate change as well. And unfortunately, that's not a commitment that's shared by many mainstream politicians in Ireland. There are many who doubt climate change, who doubt the science, and deliberately so. Recently, in the Shannon, I called for a day-long debate on climate change to emulate what was done in the US Senate, where they had an overnight debate on climate change to try and break through the barriers of the media there, where there's a lot of doubt being expressed about climate change. I thought it was an excellent initiative in the US Senate by the Democrats. One senator, a highly respected independent senator, accused me of trying to have a debate about the weather. So that is unfortunately the level of debate that's there at the moment in Ireland in relation to climate change, and indeed in relation to many environmental issues. That's the reality of the situation. That type of thinking is starting to infuse Irish society. We had a recent primetime debate on climate change, but they started the debate, if you remember, getting everyone to agree that climate change was real. And I at the time was so angry, I was tweeting avidly, expressing my complete outrage that this would be allowed to be broadcast in RTE, that there was any issue about the reality of it. I think that's the first starting point. I think for many people in the environmental movement, I mean, that's you would almost be stepping back to get to that point. But unfortunately, many people are at that point in society. That is mainstream thinking in the United States, as far as I can see, and it's in danger of becoming mainstream thinking in Ireland. So I have a huge commitment to the environment. I think it's an extremely complicated issue. I have a huge commitment to good planning as well at a very basic level. I think there have been some disastrous planning decisions taken in this country, some of them in this region, it has to be said as well. In relation to the climate change bill, I think at the end of the last government, I suppose the influence of the Green Party was there, but Fianna Fáil supported the climate change bill at the time. That died a death with the fall of the government. This government had produced a very much a watered down climate change bill. We think it's a step back from what we had proposed at the start of 2011, and it's disappointing because I think we've always tried to lead the way despite our size on environmental issues. There's a range of other issues. I would certainly be supporting stringent emissions targets at European level. I've worked hard on the whole issue of pylons, and I think this is one of the problems now again that those supporting renewable energy have. That renewable energy now in this country and among communities has become associated with large corporations. It has become associated with secrecy. It has become associated with the public not knowing what's going on, and that's hugely evident in the pylons debate. Pylons have become associated with renewable energy and therefore with protecting the environment, and people don't like pylons, so that's a bad place to be, and I don't think that's been countered enough. And I think we should be supporting the undergrounding of electrical cables where that is possible, and I think it's very unfortunate that equality has happened. The same in relation to wind energy, because of the secrecy, because of the secret deals that are going on. Wind energy has become associated with corporations, with unfriendly multinationals, with profit making, and we'd like to see more community ownership there as well. And I think those who are advocating for wind energy must recognise the concerns that communities have. I'll speak briefly. I mean, I think it is a fact that a lot of good laws have come from the European Union and our obligations there. And sometimes when you hear people giving out about all these directives and regulations that we're subject to, you might say that's terrible, all this red tape that Europe is imposing on us. But the reality is that the vast majority of laws that have been decided at a European level, and they haven't always been imposed, they have been decided by ministers and indeed by the Parliament. Parliament has co-decision now in practically every area of law. The European Parliament have to approve any law coming from the Commission. But most of the laws are actually good laws. Most of the laws are there to protect us, such as you recognise in the question. Environmental laws have mainly come from the European Union. I think climate change is the most significant environmental issue of our time, and I certainly would be hoping to do as much as I can on that issue if elected to the European Parliament. Yeah, just on the emissions reduction targets, I think we should aim for the highest possible. But if you go in there with single-minded on one figure, I'm not sure that helps the situation, because as I said, there are people there who don't even accept that this is happening at all. And I think Marion's right in the sense that there may be more of that frame of mind afterwards. We've got to aim at the highest level. I'm particularly concerned about agriculture, I have to say. We have to bear that in mind. That is a reality. We need to make food for ourselves. We need to have food, obviously, for export for our economy and the jobs that come from agriculture. I think it's 28% of our emissions this country are agriculture derived. So there's a massive impact there that we can't wave away. However, I do agree and accept that we must do as much as we can in relation to climate change, and that certainly would be at the top of my agenda if I'm elected to the European Parliament. So I have to say I agree with Luke in relation to biodiversity and I suppose the affinity that ordinary people who work in the countryside have. Luke talks about people on the bogs, and certainly my own father-in-law would be in the same position. He's very interested in the wildlife, the plant life of the bogs, and yet obviously committed to heating his home and cutting turf. I've known the first time I ever was shown where a kingfisher would be was a member of a local gun club actually during a debate about hunting, and we just got talking about this. These are some of the most environmental people you'll ever meet, and I think I do agree with that bottom-up approach. Now I disagree slightly with Ming in the sense that I do and as I said earlier, I think a lot of our environmental laws that protect our environment, environmental impact assessments before planning applications, etc. It's all European derived. I think that's necessary and good. But we do have to sort of go from a bottom-up approach and maybe see some things that appear to be contradictions maybe aren't. One of the issues I think that's very important and has been crucial to trying to sort of keep our biodiversity enhanced has been the REP scheme for farmers, where farmers have been given a relatively small payment to keep the place right and to encourage biodiversity, encourage the environment. That scheme has been cut to shreds now this year under the new cap, and I believe, and I don't think it has really filtered down on the ground yet, but I believe that the farmers will be hugely disincentivised from going for the new scheme that's going to replace reps or the original reps, and that's going to have a dramatic impact. And or people who aren't associated with farming may say, "Oh, sure, look, they're getting enough or whatever," but the reality is they're not. And secondly, this will have a dramatic effect on biodiversity and trying to maintain habitats indeed, and trying to keep farms in a fit manner that can keep them in tune with nature. So I think that's going to be a major issue on the farming agenda this year, but it's going to have knock-on effects on biodiversity, and I'd like to see what the Minister's proposed tentatively in relation to that to be looked at seriously again. Yeah, just on the emissions reduction targets, I think I have to say agree generally with Marion. I think we should aim for the highest possible, but if you go in there with single-minded on one figure, I'm not sure that helps the situation, because as I said, there are people there who don't even accept that this is happening at all, and I think Marion's right in the sense that there may be more of that frame of mind afterwards. We've got to aim at the highest level. I'm particularly concerned about agriculture, I have to say. We have to bear that in mind. That is a reality. We need to make food for ourselves. We need to have food obviously for export for our economy and the jobs that come from agriculture. I think it's 28% of our emissions this country are agriculture derived. So there's a massive impact there that we can't wave away. However, I do agree and accept that we must do as much as we can in relation to climate change, and that certainly would be at the top of my agenda if I'm elected to the European Parliament. The issue of pylons has become very much associated with renewable energy and environmentalism, and I just find that extraordinary actually, because certainly when I first came across this issue in terms of the 400 kV lines through Meath, Cavan and Monaghan, which first came across my desk about 5 months after I was first elected to politics in 2007, it never occurred to me that there was a connection with, I would say, environmentalism. I mean, we certainly were told at that time that there was a need to, there was a partial need to bring wind energy from other parts of the country through interconnectors, etc. So I've been sort of campaigning on the issue of pylons for the last 7 years, including when we were in government, and it wasn't handled very, very satisfactorily when we were in government. I think that's fair to say. I agree that they should be undergrounded. However, not everybody agrees with that actually. We have an underground line between County Meath and the coast at Dublin, and while there wasn't any controversy in County Meath, there was huge controversy in County Dublin, in Rush, where people, I think, went as far as the Supreme Court to try and prevent those lines being buried due to possible health and other impacts. So this is never a simple issue. I think with any new technology or any new way of doing things, some people will find some reason to oppose them. My primary concern in relation to pylons actually is how ugly they are and that they're unnecessary. There are health concerns, yes, I have to say, I have looked at the evidence in relation to health, and I am concerned about it. But I have to say, I think there are other arguments too. Other people say that the health effects aren't there. I would be worried about them. I wouldn't want one beside me, and I'd be worried for my children if there were one. I do worry about campaigns who emphasise the health effects for this reason. And northeast pylon pressure in my area haven't really emphasised, and they've acknowledged them and they've educated people about them, absolutely, and the research is out there. But the practical reality is that this is a matter that will finally be decided, I suppose, first by the government, but by Bord Pleanála, and they're unlikely to take the health concerns into effect because of international guidance that's there. So they would have to be changed first. That's my assessment of what Bord Pleanála may say. I'm not saying that's right. I am not saying that's right at all. In fact, quite the opposite. But I think from a practical point of view, that may be what Bord Pleanála would say. And I think certainly my NEPP, I know at the latest meeting, yes, they had a lot of talk on the health effects, but they have emphasised other sides of the argument, and there are many arguments against pylons, and I support those arguments. I would agree with undergrounding them. I think that the EMF limits, they need to be changed. They haven't been changed in quite some time. But as I say, if you underground them, there will be some people who will object to it, and they will find other reasons to fight against it. I put my cards on the table. I'd be very, very happy if those pylons were undergrounded. I don't want them to go ahead. We've had a government there which has, I think, discriminated against the northeast of the country in relation to this project, because they've initiated full reviews of the grid link and the grid west and the grid link, and in relation to north-south, they seem willing to go ahead with that. This particular planning application on the north-south went to Bord Pleanála in 2010. It collapsed in a heap, that's the best way of putting it, due to incompetence at very high levels of the applicants, and it cost communities a massive amount of money, and I've supported the organisations in relation to their demands in relation to that, but they've been very, very badly affected by that. This is a battle that's going on a long time, and one final point I'd make is, and again it feeds into the public suspicion about all of this, is that, as I said earlier, in 2007 when this first became an issue, this was renewable energy was part of the problem for Ergo that they wanted to solve. That has been dropped actually in many of the discussions at official level in Ergo. Oh no, it's just about reinforcing the grid. I don't believe that, but I think it is a real pity that they have become associated with the environmental cause, because that's doing huge damage to the environmental cause. In relation to fracking, I actually prefer the term hydraulic fracturing, because there are people in large parts of the country who don't really know about fracking, because it's maybe not going to affect them. And I think if you use the word fracturing, I think it actually explains it much better in terms of what it actually does, breaking up our natural landscape and just breaking things up. I think really just sets it up for people who may not understand it very well. I mean, my position is I don't agree with fracking. I think it should be banned. It shouldn't happen. And it's my party position. I mean, I suppose the second part of that question possibly then becomes irrelevant, but if it manages to help in that process, yes, I'd support it. But fundamentally, I don't think it should happen at all. I think Mark hit the nail on the head. I mean, we'd all support wind energy, and I certainly do, if it's in the right place, and there are places for it. I think that the real problem that has happened with wind energy in especially the last year, has been these proposals from giant multinational companies which are shrouded in secrecy, which involve the government in that secrecy, which involve conflicts of interest at various levels as well, and where wind turbines are proposed to be about 185 metres high. It's absolutely extraordinary. And to be honest with you, I couldn't have imagined that a year ago. I wouldn't have known about wind turbines being 185 metres high. Sometimes they're seen as cuddly things that everyone sort of likes, that are good. And again, they have damaged the environmental cause, these particular companies, because again, they're seen as simply profiteering and imposing themselves upon communities. So yes, I do fully support wind energy. I think it is important to use it. I don't subscribe to all these arguments, oh, it's useless and all that. I think it can be very, very good. It can help us go to it can help us reduce our carbon footprint, etc. But we've got to work with communities. We've got to put these things in the right place. They've got to be good neighbours, essentially. We've got to protect communities and protect people first. Now, having said all of that, there is not one type of energy, if it were introduced today, there wouldn't be objections to. If we decided today, we found a new product called natural gas and we're going to import it from Russia and we're going to burn it up and create this climate change, I mean, there'd be massive opposition to it. So there's and I think and yet it is accepted and people are still burning and there's no problem. And yet, if it were introduced today, many of the people who are burning it would oppose it. That's a fact. And I think the reality is that any alternative that is proposed, there will always be people that will object to some aspect of it, and probably for very good reasons in many cases. I think Mark is right. We're going to have a full debate on energy policy. Banking has been a big feature of European policy and European politics over the last number of years. It will continue to be so. But it is likely that energy policy will overtake banking in the next few years, because we're going to have to do something. We have to keep the lights switched on, and we've got to do it in a way that brings the whole country together in the common interest. I think we are coming into a situation in this world at the moment where corporations are taking control of a lot of things, and we had a political reaction against that when it happened in the US at the turn of the 20th century. President Theodore Roosevelt at the time was the trust buster, and railed against corporations and looked for better conditions for workers, etc. And I think we may be coming to another point like that. GM foods, I have to be honest, I mean, I'm not particularly exercised by technological developments in food. I have concerns about it, certainly, but it doesn't keep me awake at night, I have to say. But it would keep me awake at night if companies or corporations had control of the food chain. That's what I don't want. And if that's what that means, then yes, absolutely not. But if there are technological developments that help people, I could support them. That's not the case, and I agree with Ming, that's not the motivation of all of these companies that are involved in that. And I certainly, it's a fundamental principle for me, they should not have the control of the food chain. The reality is, of course, they already have some control of the food chain, quite substantial control of the food chain, but we can't give them any more of that in terms of how the foods themselves are designed. Okay, in relation to the trade agreement, negotiations are currently being carried out by the European Commission. They have the exclusive right to negotiate on behalf of all of us. I think that's probably overall in our country's interest, so that other member states can't negotiate sort of better trade deals for themselves. We are in there as a very small country, and they're negotiating on our behalf. As I understand it, the European Parliament will have to approve this. I certainly will not be supporting any trade agreement that puts the interests of corporations above the interests of the people. However, I do believe that trade agreements are in the interest of the people. If there's free trade, we can boost our economy. I fully agree with that. When we had economic war and closed down the country in the 30s to trade, it wasn't good for the country. The trade deals do not frighten me or concern me. It's looking at each and every line of it to make sure that it is in the interest of the people, and secondly, it's in the interest of the economy of Ireland if elected as an MEP. So I'll study it properly, and we'll have a proper debate on it. But what I'd say in relation to the case that's in Canada, again, there are all these things going on. I mean, I could sue someone here for something. It doesn't mean I'm going to win. Like, I mean, that case, as I understand, is at a very early stage. That's under a different treaty. And I have to say, looking at it on a preliminary basis, if I were the Quebec government or the Canadian government, I wouldn't be overly concerned, I think. But these things have to be done. I think it will have a huge economic benefit for the country. But I do, as I said repeatedly in this debate, I do not believe in putting the interests of companies or corporations above the people. Theodore Roosevelt, as a US president, didn't do that. He's someone that inspires me as a historical figure. And certainly his relation, Franklin Roosevelt as well, carried on policies in a similar way. They're people that I'm interested in. They're people whose policies at the time, I believe, can be applied to today. But free trade, I think, is good. And that's my honest view.